A lot of people look at the shady areas in the garden and wonder what on earth to do with them. And yet, for me, it's one of the most fascinating areas of the garden to design, because there are so many plants that enjoy growing in cool, moist conditions out of sunlight. In fact, they thrive there. Now, I know in a shady area you don't get the violent contrast that you get in the sunny part of the garden, because no sunshine gets to it. But you gain because you can create your own contrast by using flower color, by using foliage patterns. It really is a most fascinating area to work on. At the back of the house, there's a long north-facing border which really only catches the sun for a small part of the day in summer. And when we moved in 4 years ago, I knew this position would be ideal for some of my favorite plants, the things like dwarf rhododendrons and azaleas. Now, first I laid a 3-foot wide path along the side of the house. And then to stop the soil running onto it, I built a low supporting wall. And then I cleared out all the rubbish and dug in a very heavy dressing of farmyard manure to improve the physical condition of the soil and to some extent offset the lime content of the soil. Getting the soil into the correct chemical composition is so very important if you're going to grow plants that prefer an acid soil, like, for example, rhododendrons and azaleas, because one of the curious contradictions in gardening is that whereas plants which grow normally in an alkaline soil, that's a limey soil, will grow quite happily in an acid soil, the reverse doesn't apply. You'll never persuade rhododendrons and azaleas to accept a limey soil. And if you're in any doubt about your soil, do a little test. In fact, it's something I do whenever I move to a new garden or I'm working in a new garden, and take the sample from about 4 inches down, because if you take it from the surface, the weather can alter the reading. Don't handle the sample with your fingers, because that's a sure way of altering the chemical constituency of the reading, because the sweat on your hands tends to be acid, and of course it'll change the character of that soil. Now, if you look on the test tube, there are gradation marks. Fill up the tube with soil according to the instructions which are supplied with the outfit. Don't ever deviate from those. Then, take the coloured liquid and add that to the top gradation. Not too little, not too much, but just right. And the temptation is to stick your finger over the end to shake it. You don't do that, you've got a little cork, because again your finger would alter the reading. And that chemical there, shake it up till it's thoroughly mixed with the soil. Like that. Good shaking. And that chemical will change colour, depending on what your soil is. Now, you could stand it down and let it settle, but it takes rather a long time to do that. So instead, you get another test tube, and a little funnel with a filter paper. This is a bit I like. It makes it look very scientific. And then you just tip the liquid plus soil into the filter paper. And within a short time, the liquid's filtered through, leaving the soil behind, and it's changed colour. According to whether your soil contains lime or not, it's changed colour. And you compare that colour with a chart that's also provided with the kit. And you start and you roll it over like that. And if you can see a dark shadow through the liquid against the chart, then you move it on to the next one. And there, that just comes in between the readings of 6 and 5 1/4. That is absolutely perfect, just on the acid side of neutral. And that tells me that the soil is in exactly the right chemical condition for growing dwarf rhododendrons and azaleas. And having got the soil into that condition, I started planting up the shade border, some 4 years ago now. And on the corner there, I'm going to put in a juniper. Take off the hard angle of the stonework. Always take the pots off. And there's the root system. Worth all the money I paid for it, that one. Put it in like that. That one is going to grow out either side of the stones. And I'm giving it plenty of room, too. Don't crowd the things in. Firm it down. And because that's flat, I want something hummocky next door to it. Like a small rhododendron. And rhododendrons do like the cool, moist shade. And these are the things that in the Himalayas take the place of the heathers on the moors in this country. Beautiful. Look at that fat, juicy crop of buds there. And those flowers will be blue. And there's plenty of peat in the soil to keep it moist. Beautiful. Beginning to take shape. And what to put in next? Well, a viburnum Davidii. Now, I know that they're not usually recommended for a shady border, but the best plants I ever grew were on a north face. And that's what you get if you plant the male and female, the bright blue berries. And they've hung on all the winter. Again, a good root system. So very, very important to start with a big root system. Now, Davidii makes a hummock like that. A foliage. It's a lovely, neat evergreen that'll give you interest right through the year. And because it's fairly placid, there's not a lot of bright colour, you want something to lift the interest. And the few things are brighter than a Pieris, with the bright scarlet young growths. And look at that foliage. Beautiful, all the multitudinous colours there. And the dark green. But you don't want it cutting by the frost, and this is the beauty of having it on the north face, that they start into growth much later. Hopefully when all danger of frost is gone. Like the rhododendron, you must have an acid, peaty soil. Now along to the next one. And I think a berberis, because I want a change in leaf pattern and a little later flowering. It's a good, neat berberis, this. It only grows about 18 inches high. And it has red-orange flowers. Lovely little hummocky plant. And it doesn't matter what the soil's like for that. It'll grow in either acid or alkaline soil. I want something prostrate, something horizontal. Japanese azalea. Look at the quality of the flower colour there. I've got a nasty temptation to take that into the house and enjoy it until the flowers fade, but I do want this bit of the garden to have a character by using plants that enjoy the conditions. But remember, always, they need peat in the soil, they need a soil that has no lime at all. That will grow in beauty year after year. I've got a stopcock there. Essential pieces of equipment, but a nuisance in the garden. So I'm going to choose something to hide it. A quick, fairly quick growing hybrid rhododendron. Lovely plant, blue tit. Rich blue flowers. And much less frost prone than the Japanese azaleas. There we go. That's it, and that will soon grow over and hide the top of the stopcock. There, the framework of the border is established, and what I've got to do now is fill the spaces in between with bulbs, with low-growing herbaceous plants, the things like the Christmas roses and the violets. Anything that'll give me that little point of interest through the season, because that's what you're aiming at with a shady border. You must have colour, you must have interest the whole year round. very pleased with the shade border. In spite of being on the north side of the house and fairly damp, there's been something in the flower, or something giving colour, right through the winter. I've got the primroses, little coloured primroses there. And the heather, that's been in bloom, the Merton ruby, since, middle of January. And imagine looking out of a kitchen window on a dull January day and seeing something as bright as that. Now, this is on the north side. It runs east to west, which means it was a wind funnel, and that was a problem because no plant that I know enjoys growing in a wind funnel, particularly rhododendrons, which are the plants I intend to make a feature of in this particular border. So to stop the wind and to stop the ground draft, I put in a conifer at the end and then a lower growing conifer, because so often when you put something perpendicular like that in, you push the wind down to soil level and it's sickling everything off at soil level. So the prostrate conifer stops that particular ground draft. So I've got good shelter here. And the best reason I can think of for leaving holes in a border when you're designing it, when you're going around a garden centre and you see a plant that you absolutely must have, what's the point in buying it if there's nowhere to put it? And that's one, a Repens hybrid with lovely dark red flowers. And that one, to go there. Don't be frightened to put positive colours in together. You make a full stop in the border, as long as you lighten, as long as you give them that touch of lightness with putting pastel shades around them. And little Pemmicoense, delicate pink flowers. And this is a wee bit tender compared to the other one, so it needs a little more sheltered place. And I always work on the principle with my plants, give them what they like. So that one goes in there where it gets the shelter from the taller growing azalea around it. And remember, when you're planting rhododendrons, don't ever plant them too deep. This is one of the beauties of container-grown plants. You can plant them at any time, of course, but you get a very good idea of the proper depth to put them in. The level of the soil in the pot must be level with the soil when you plant it. And if you're going to treat your rhododendrons really well, you mulch them up with peat, because that's what they like, the cool, moist, spongy conditions. The soil should look like a Christmas pudding mixture, absolutely oozing richness. Fingers over the top of the pot, tap on the bottom. And they don't need to be bedded in very firm either, because they have a fibrous root system. And there, that's level. The root ball with the soil surface. Looks happy already. And back to little Pemmicoense. They root very easily from cuttings, the small-leaved rhododendrons. I've got some specimens along there that I rooted when I first put the border down, and they're going to flower this time. And there's so much more yours when you've grown and plants yourself from cuttings, and you can always find space for them, because rhododendrons move very well indeed. They've got a fibrous root system, and though this is the best time of the year, the early spring, when the soil is warming up and growth is starting, to move them, provided it's moist, you can shift them round at any time as long as you're careful. There's the original soil ball level, absolutely level with the surface of the soil now. That plant looks content and at home already. Apart from rhododendrons, there are so many other plants that revel in the shade border. A little bird's eye primrose that grows naturally in the moist meadows, on limey soil in fact. I've seen meadows that were a haze of blue when the bird's eye primrose was in flower. Delightful plant. And the phyllodes, which as far as I know hasn't got a popular name, but I always think of this as the Japanese heather, because it's just as determinedly acid-loving as the heather that grows on the moors. It's a lovely foliage plant, even when it's not in flower. And the harebell poppy, delicate, lovely. And I grow this particularly in shade because in full sun the flower colour fades, whereas in shade it lasts a long time. Trillium grandiflorum, the little wake robin from the Canadian woodlands. It's delicate, it's lovely, and this is the only place I can grow it, in the acid soil amongst the rhododendrons. I'm fortunate that behind the house I've got two sorts of shade. I've got the rather dense moist shade, because the house casts its shadow over the border. And then a little further along, just the width of a path away, I've got the dry shade, and this is because of the ash tree there. It's a very bad gardener, the ash tree. Not only have you got surface root competition, but you've got the roots taking all the moisture from the soil. But you can turn that to advantage, because there are some plants that positively like dry conditions. So I've already started. I've got conifers in the little Gregoriana there, and a dwarf conifer, boulevard, with silver leaves. I've got a hedgehog holly, a variegated form of the hedgehog holly, and then a little hebe with the pale green leaves, all the time trying to lift the shadows with the variegated and pale green. And that will be the ultimate planting of the bed. They will eventually take over. But in the meantime, because it's enclosed and because it's intimate, I can use the tiny plants, the little things, the miniatures that would be lost in the main garden. But thinking always in terms of colour combinations, you can have beautiful plants, individually beautiful plants, but they can be emphasised by putting in something that complements it. And thinking in terms of the golden green background, I thought a little Aquilegia, only a dwarf one. Won't get very much bigger than that, so it's in proportion. I think that'll do fine. It's another problem with ash trees. You get the seed falling all over the border, but they're easily pulled out as long as you catch them when they're young. Soil in good condition. I like the foliage of this plant too. It's that lovely glaucous green. Most attractive. And because it's good ground cover, a little ajuga, a bugle. Massive flower on a small plant, the lovely spikes, different shape entirely and colour tone to the Aquilegia. And that will spread out like a carpet. Fine. And the oxalis, typical woodlander, so it'll love these conditions, a beautiful little plant. Here I've got it in competition with a fairly strong growing ivy. It is a lovely little wood sorrel, that. It really is a splendid little plant. And because it gets a little bigger than the others, the spurge is more on the outskirts of the planting. Beautiful little thing, that, though, because it's so much like spring, the pale yellow and the green ruff behind it. A little bit dry as well, so it'll be happy to be out. That spreads into a group about 18 inches across. Euphorbia pilosa major. It's a most attractive little spurge in yellow and green. Well, that's a start. I've got the basic pattern and I'm beginning to put the little frills in round the edges. But I'm not going to rush it though, because I want to make sure that the colours are right and the foliage patterns are absolutely right. And over in the moist part of the shade border, once the rhododendrons and azaleas have finished flowering, they're the foliage tones, the greys and the greens, which I find quite delightful. Certainly attractive enough to keep my interest in the border the maximum amount of time. But to emphasize them, I've included some bedding plants, and my favourite is the Viola campanula blue, just the lavender shades against the greys and greens of the rhododendron. And there, where the border bulges out into the garden, where it catches the evening light, I've planted the dark red-flowered candy tuft. And the patina of light and shade there is absolutely lovely in the evening. And because plants like the candy tuft are annuals and will be dead by the time the autumn arrives, I need flowers to carry the interest through the autumn and into the winter. And the hardy cyclamen, the little cyclamen hederaefolium, are ideal for that, because you've got the beautiful flowers during the autumn, poised little ballerinas, and then the interesting marbled foliage that persists right through the winter. And that's the shade border finished. You know, it's right, because I've chosen the sort of plants that enjoy growing under cool, moist conditions. This is imperative wherever you're gardening. You've got to get the plants that suit the conditions. Now, my soil doesn't contain any lime, but don't worry if yours does, because there are just as many plants which enjoy growing in a limey soil as there are that'll grow in an acid one. It's just a quiet modulation of tones, of flowers and foliage. Taken a few years to grow in, I must admit, but now, from the middle of January right into the autumn, I've got interest there. I know this much. If I didn't have a shade part in my garden, my goodness, somehow or other I'd have to create one.